What if the night we now call Halloween was never meant for costumes and candy, but for crossing between the world of the living and the dead? Long before carved pumpkins glowed in American windows, before trick-or-treaters filled suburban streets, there was a night wrapped in fire and fear, a night when the Celts, an ancient people who walked the misty lands of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, believed the boundary between the living and the spirit world grew thin. They called it Samhain, pronounced Samhain, the festival of endings and beginnings. The harvest was complete, winter's chill was near, and death lingered close enough to feel. On that night, the fires burned bright on every hill. Farmers left offerings of grain and milk outside their doors, not for neighbors, but for spirits. The Celts believed that the dead returned on Samhain, walking among the living, seeking warmth, remembrance, or revenge. Men wore animal skins and masks to hide from wandering ghosts. Women whispered prayers to ward off unseen eyes. Children huddled close to the fire as the Druids, the wise priests of the old world, lifted their voices to the gods, asking for protection from what lurked in the darkness. For them, this was not a night of play. It was a night of power, sacred and terrifying. The living honored the dead, not to celebrate them, but to survive them. But centuries later, when Christianity swept across Europe, the Church could not erase this ancient night. So it transformed it, turning Samhain into All Hallows' Eve, the eve before All Saints' Day. And thus began a strange fusion, faith and fear dancing together under one moon. Over time, the sacred became symbolic. The firelight turned to candlelight. The masks became costumes. The offerings became candy. Yet, beneath the laughter and pumpkins, the whispers of that ancient night still echo. Because Halloween, as we know it, was born from the belief that once a year, the veil between worlds grows thin, and for one brief moment, the dead remember the living, and the living remember the dead. So before we speak of candy and costumes, let us travel back to where it all began, to a night of fire, fear, and faith, the night the spirits walked. Long before Halloween had a name, there was only the fire in the dark. The year was ending, the fields were bare, the last sheaf of grain had been cut, the final apples gathered from the trees. In the Celtic lands of ancient Europe, Ireland, Scotland, and parts of northern France, this was not just a season. It was a passage between worlds. The people called it Samhain, the festival of the dead, the doorway of winter. To the Celts, time was a circle, not a straight line. The year turned like a great wheel, and Samhain marked its most mysterious point, when the sun's power waned and the darkness grew strong. It was the season when summer's warmth died and winter's shadow came alive. On this night, they believed, the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. Fires were kindled on every hilltop. Bonfires, they called them, from which we get the word bonfire. These flames were sacred, lit to keep back the shadows and honor the spirits wandering freely across the earth. Families gathered close, their faces glowing in the firelight. They spoke in hushed voices about those who had gone before, fathers, mothers, children whose names the wind still carried. They left food on their tables, not for themselves, but for the unseen guests who might pass by their doors. Do not offend them, the elders warned. Welcome them, and they will bless your home. Reject them, and they may lead you into the dark. The Druids, priests of the old religion, walked among the people in long robes, carrying torches made from bundles of reeds dipped in animal fat. They whispered prayers to the gods of nature, to the spirits of air, fire, water, and earth. They spoke of Cernunnos, the horned god of the wild, the master of life, death, and rebirth. Of Brigid, goddess of the hearth and light. Of Dagda, the great father who watched over mankind. On this night, they believed, even the gods came close. The boundaries between the mortal and the divine dissolved like smoke in the wind. People disguised themselves in masks and animal hides, believing that if spirits walked the earth, they might pass unseen among them. The masks were not for celebration, they were for survival. In the flickering light, faces became shadows, and the air grew heavy with mystery. The scent of burning herbs and roasting meat filled the air, mingled with the sound of drums echoing across the hills. It was not evil, it was reverence. Samhain was not about worshipping death, it was about acknowledging it. The Celts understood what the modern world often forgets, that life and death are part of the same breath, and the living are never far from the dead. In their world, death was not the end. It was the crossing into the next realm, a journey every soul must take. And so, they honored it. They celebrated it. They feared it. Some lit lanterns carved from turnips to guide wandering spirits, the earliest ancestors of the jack-o'-lanterns we know today. Inside these crude faces burned tiny flames, symbols of the human soul shining against the darkness. As midnight approached, the Druids gathered at sacred stone circles, places where they believed the earth's power was strongest. There, they lifted their staffs to the stars and whispered to the other side. Spirits of the departed, walk gently tonight. Take the offerings given and bring peace to those who remember you. To the Celts, this was not superstition. It was survival. Winter was harsh and death was near. Every year, Samhain reminded them that life hung by a thread, and that gratitude, faith, and remembrance were the fire that kept the darkness away. But change was coming. Far from their misty lands, a new faith was rising, one that spoke of one God, one truth, and one life beyond death. And when the fires of Samhain burned again in years to come, they would not burn alone, for Christianity was about to meet the ancient world. And the night of the spirits would soon be called something else, All Hallows Eve. The fire still burned on the hills of the Celts, but a new light had begun to rise in the world. Far beyond the misty fields of Ireland, a message was spreading, of one God, one salvation, one eternal life beyond the grave. The followers of Christ were moving through Europe, and with them came the cross, the scriptures, and a new way of seeing life and death. For the Celts, Samhain had always been a sacred threshold, a time to honor the dead, to acknowledge the unseen. But to the Church, such rituals carried danger. They saw in the bonfires and masks a world still held captive by fear, by spirits, by the memory of gods who were not God at all. Yet the Church was wise in its transformation of culture. It did not destroy the old ways overnight. It baptized them. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III dedicated November 1st as All Saints' Day, a holy day to honor all the saints and martyrs who had gone before. And the night before that sacred day became known as All Hallows' Eve, the eve of the hallowed ones. The timing was no coincidence. The fires of Samhain still burned, but now they burned under new names, carrying new prayers. For the first time, the Celts began to replace offerings for wandering spirits with prayers for the souls of the departed. The masks that once hid them from ghosts became symbols in Christian processions. What was once Samhain, the festival of the dead, became All Hallows' Eve, the night before the Feast of the Saints. The transformation was not instant, nor was it clean. For generations, the two worlds coexisted, the old and the new, faith and folklore side by side. In small villages, children still carried lanterns made of carved turnips to light the way for spirits, while priests led processions to bless the dead. The people still spoke of the thin veil between worlds, but now they prayed that the souls wandering in purgatory might find rest through their intercession. Christianity had changed the meaning, but not the mystery. In the countryside, whispers persisted. On All Hallows' Eve, the spirits still walk. And perhaps they did, for even the Church taught that this night was sacred, the vigil before the day when heaven's gates stood wide for all who had lived and died in faith. Some said the saints themselves walked among the living that night, not to harm, but to bless. Others said the souls not yet purified wandered near, drawn to the prayers of the faithful. Light replaced fire, faith replaced fear. But the shadows remained, and with time, as Christianity spread through Europe, All Hallows' Eve began to blend even further, gathering fragments of Roman festivals like Feralia, a day to honor the dead, and Pomona, the goddess of fruit and harvest. From Pomona's festival came the apples, the fruit that symbolized life and temptation, and soon Children began to play games of bobbing for apples, never knowing they were touching echoes of ancient worship. The church had reshaped the night, but it could not silence its mystery, for even as priests prayed and bells rang for departed souls, the wind on All Hallows' Eve still carried whispers of spirits near and unseen eyes watching. To some, it was superstition, to others, remembrance, but in truth, it was both, a world suspended between salvation and fear, and as centuries passed, that tension would only grow stronger. For the night once meant to honor saints would soon belong to shadows again. A new age was coming, one filled with stories of witches, wandering ghosts, and the dark firelight that glowed in every heart that still remembered the old gods. And thus began the age of fear, the age of witches, whispers, and fire. The bells of the church rang across medieval Europe, but the wind still carried older songs. It was the Middle Ages, a world ruled by faith and fear in equal measure. By day the people prayed for heaven's mercy, by night they whispered of shadows. All Hallows' Eve had taken root across Christendom, but its ancient heart still beat quietly beneath the cross. The fires still burned on the hills, though now they were lit in secret, their glow hidden from watchful priests. For in the minds of the people, the night before All Saints' Day remained a time when unseen forces stirred, when the boundary between heaven, earth, and the underworld grew perilously thin. And as Christianity reshaped the world, so too did fear reshape the night. Stories began to spread, of witches flying on the wind, of restless souls trapped between purgatory and paradise, of black cats that carried the spirits of the damned. The old ways had not died. They had been reborn in whispers. Villagers spoke of women who knew the herbs of the forest, who healed the sick, and who spoke to the wind. Once revered as wise, these women were now feared as witches. To the fearful, their knowledge came not from nature but from darkness. A storm was brewing, not in the sky, but in the soul of humanity. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, the witch hunts swept across Europe. Thousands, mostly women, were accused of serving the devil, of casting curses, of dancing under moonlight on All Hallows' Eve. In truth, most were innocent, healers, midwives, outsiders. But in an age of plague, famine, and despair, the people needed someone to blame, and fear always finds a face. Bonfires that once honored ancestors now burned in judgment. The same fire that once symbolized life and protection became a weapon of death. Yet, even amid this terror, the old belief endured, that on this night spirits still walked. Children were told not to wander after sunset. Families lit candles in their windows to guide the souls of loved ones home. Bells tolled at midnight to drive away evil. It was said that if you walked alone on All Hallows' Eve, you might feel a hand brush your shoulder, the touch of a soul seeking prayers. In the flickering firelight, shadows danced on walls. To some, they were tricks of the flame. To others, they were visitors from the other side. The church taught people to pray for the dead, to free them from purgatory's grasp. But superstition whispered that not all souls could be freed. Some were trapped, restless, bitter, vengeful. And so All Hallows' Eve became a night of paradox, holy and haunted. The faithful prayed, the fearful hid. The curious told stories by the fire. Out of those stories came the legends we still know, of ghosts wandering at midnight, of witches who gathered under the moon, of black cats crossing paths, of candle flames flickering when unseen spirits draw near. The people no longer called it Samhain, but the echoes of Samhain still lived in every whisper of the wind. For though the church had sanctified the calendar, it could not silence the heart. Humanity has always been haunted, not only by the dead, but by its own memory of darkness. And as centuries turned, the whispers would travel west, across the sea, carried by those who fled famine, persecution, and fear. They brought with them their faith, their stories, their firelight. And when they reached a new world, under new skies, the old night of spirits would rise again, this time in America. The old world faded behind them, mist, memory, and superstition left upon the gray Atlantic waves. The 17th century dawned with the sound of sails and the promise of freedom. Across the ocean, a new world awaited, vast, untamed, and full of hope. Among those who journeyed were the Irish and Scottish immigrants carrying little more than faith, family, and stories of All Hallows' Eve. In America, the Puritans who first settled in New England wanted nothing to do with the old rituals. They feared witchcraft, they feared the dark, and they feared the memory of Europe's haunted nights. To them, the witch trials of Salem were proof that darkness lurked too close to men's hearts. And so, for a time, the fires of Halloween went out. But old traditions never die. They sleep, waiting for new soil to grow in. In the 1800s, as waves of Irish and Scottish immigrants arrived in the United States, they brought their Halloween customs with them. The lighting of lanterns, the wearing of disguises, and the tales of spirits that walked on All Hallows' Eve. But in America, something changed. The land was young, diverse, restless. Old beliefs mixed with new cultures, African, Native American, European, and from that blending, Halloween took on a new shape. No longer only a night of fear, it became a night of storytelling and mischief. Children and young men began to play pranks, knocking on doors, stealing gates, hiding wagons. Communities laughed at their boldness, calling it Mischief Night. The glowing turnips of Ireland were replaced by the pumpkins of America, larger and easier to carve. Soon the orange faces of the jack-o'-lantern lit porches across towns and farms, and with them the old legend returned, the story of Stingy Jack, the trickster who cheated the devil and was doomed to wander the earth with only a carved lantern to light his way. Around every glowing pumpkin, that story flickered, a tale as old as Samhain, reborn in American firelight. Halloween had crossed the ocean, but its soul had not changed. It was still the night when people laughed at fear, when they dressed as ghosts and witches not to invite evil, but to mock it. By the late 19th century, communities began organizing parades and autumn gatherings. Costumes shifted from sacred to playful, from spirits to skeletons, from saints to scarecrows. The Victorian age brought fascination with the afterlife. Seances, ghost stories, and candlelit games filled drawing rooms. Even those who did not believe in spirits could not resist the thrill of pretending, and Halloween became the stage for that pretending. By the early 20th century, America had claimed Halloween as its own. The holiday that once whispered of death became a carnival of life. Laughter, costumes, and glowing light in the cold autumn air. Newspapers began printing Halloween safety tips. Candy companies saw opportunity, and soon the custom of trick-or-treat emerged, a balance between mischief and peace, where children received sweets instead of causing chaos. Parents opened their doors, neighbors smiled. The night once meant to appease spirits became a celebration of community. But beneath it all, something older still breathed, the pulse of the ancient night that began in fire and fear. For even now, as jack-o'-lanterns gleam and laughter fills the streets, every candle's flame flickers with memory of a time when people lit fires not for fun, but for protection. And though few remember it, the festival of Samhain still lives within every Halloween night. The world had changed, but the veil still remained thin. And for those who listen closely, the wind on October's last night still carries a whisper. The dead remember you, and you remember them. The fires of Samhain had turned to candlelight. The prayers of All Hallows' Eve had become laughter in the streets. The world had changed faster than anyone could have imagined. The 20th century brought light where there was once darkness, science where there was once superstition, and industry where there was once silence. But one night every year, the old world still came alive. Halloween had become an American tradition, no longer a sacred vigil but a celebration of imagination. Children roamed from house to house under the glow of porch lights, chanting words that carried ancient echoes. Trick or treat. Few realized that this playful demand was a shadow of the old Celtic offering, food left for spirits so they would not bring harm. The costumes, once worn to hide from wandering ghosts, were now worn for fun, Witches, skeletons, vampires, and ghouls, the same creatures once feared in whispers, now danced through the neighborhoods in plastic masks and fabric capes. The spirit of fear had been tamed, or so it seemed. But behind the laughter and candy wrappers, something deeper lingered, the timeless fascination with what lies beyond death. Movie theaters glowed with the light of new stories. Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, The Exorcist, reflections of ancient fears dressed in modern form. The world had changed, but humanity's questions had not. Who are we after the body fades? What happens when the veil between worlds opens, even for a moment? Halloween became the night to ask those questions safely, behind a mask, under the hum of streetlights. The commercial world took notice. Candy companies flooded stores with chocolates and sweets. Costume makers created endless disguises. Film studios turned October into a season of terror and thrill. By the 1970s, Halloween had become a billion-dollar celebration, bright, colorful, and full of noise. But as the celebration grew louder, its meaning grew quieter. The prayers of All Hallows' Eve faded into nostalgia. The spiritual reflection, remembering the dead, honoring the unseen, gave way to parties, lights, and haunted houses. Yet even so, Halloween remained strangely holy, because beneath the costumes and candy, something ancient still breathed. The masks may have changed, but the impulse behind them had not. Humanity still dressed up, not just to pretend, but to confront what it could not control. We wear masks to laugh at death. We light candles to remember we are still alive. We gather in the dark because some part of us still believes that on this night, something beyond this world stirs. Not in fear, but in reminder. For one night a year, the modern world allows itself to look into the shadows and smile. And maybe that is the true spirit of Halloween, to face the darkness not with trembling but with wonder, because every jack-o'-lantern that burns on a doorstep still echoes the ancient prayer, "Light our way through the night," and every laugh that rings through the cold autumn air still answers the oldest truth of all, that death has never been the end of the story. The costumes may hide it, the candy may sweeten it, but deep down, Halloween still whispers the same message it did thousands of years ago. The veil is thin. Remember what came before, and live well while you still can. The night of spirits is over, but its echoes remain. Every October, as autumn breathes its last, the world grows still for a moment. The air turns cold, the leaves fall like whispered memories, and we light candles again, perhaps not knowing why. We carve smiling faces into pumpkins and place them at our doors. We dress in masks and walk beneath the moon. We laugh at ghosts, we tell stories of death and return. And somehow, in all that pretending, we touch something real. Because Halloween was never just about fear. It was always about the conversation between life and death, from the fires of Samhain to the prayers of All Hallows' Eve, from the witches of the old world to the trick-or-treaters of today. The message has never truly changed. Remember that the world is more than what we see. Remember that those who came before us still echo in who we are. Remember that life, fragile and fleeting, is a sacred gift, a flame we must guard against the cold. We often think of Halloween as a night of darkness, but maybe it's not darkness at all. Maybe it's a mirror, one that shows us how precious the light really is. Every candle flickering in the window, every lantern glowing on the porch, every laugh shared in the dark, it all whispers the same ancient truth: light still wins. The Celts knew it when they built their fires. The saints knew it when they prayed for the dead. And even today, whether we call it Samhain, All Hallows' Eve, or Halloween, the flame endures. For the real power of Halloween is not in its ghosts, its candy, or its fear. It is in its reminder, a reminder that death is not to be worshipped or denied, but understood. A reminder that the shadows we fear most often belong to the stories we have forgotten to honor. And perhaps, in lighting our candles each year, we are doing more than celebrating a holiday. Perhaps, without even knowing it, we are keeping an ancient promise. The same promise made by those first fires on Celtic hills, that even when the nights grow long and the world grows cold, the light will always return. So when you step outside this Halloween and feel the chill in the air, pause for a moment. Listen, the laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of wind, they are all part of the same song, the one that's been sung for thousands of years. The song that says, "The veil is thin, the past still breathes, and light still lives." If this story opened your eyes to the deeper meaning behind Halloween, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more cinematic journeys into ancient truths and timeless faith. Next episode, the truth about witches, power, fear, and the battle for the soul. Until then, keep your light burning. The world still needs it.